Hey guys, tonight we drift off into the cold spray of the North Atlantic. You're standing on a wave-battered island, barely more than a jagged rock, while fog rolls in like some lazy ghost. The air tastes like salt, old fish, and bird poop that's been baking into the stone for centuries. And scattered across this gray slab of nothing, hundreds of chunky, tuxedoed birds. Black backs, white bellies, beady eyes staring like they know something you don't. They're waddling everywhere. They waddle to the edge of the cliff. They waddle into each other. Some just stand there, blank-faced, as if they forgot why they moved in the first place. These are great auks, Pinguinus impenis if you want to get fancy, but you can just call them history's most exhausted-looking seabirds. And here's the thing, they're doomed. You probably won't survive this either if you're a great auk. Not that you can fly away from it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far this sleepy little crew reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging across damp rock slick with algae, the wind humming low across this godforsaken island. The sea is angry as usual. But the great auks are just here. Dozens of them. Hundreds, depending on the season. They stand around in clumps, half alert, half bored. You don't hear much sound, no bird song, no cheerful chirps, just the occasional low grunt. These birds don't sing, they mutter. Their voices are muffled and absurd, like someone trying to hum through a pillow. And they smell. Not in a romantic, nature's musk kind of way. More like if a fish factory had a mold problem and someone spilled warm milk on it. But you stay because you want to see what life was like for a creature that evolution more or less abandoned halfway through. Here's what you notice first. These birds are not meant for land. Their feet slap the stone like wet flippers, because they are wet flippers. Their legs are way too far back on their bodies, so they sort of tip forward when they try to move. It's like watching a bowling pin attempt yoga. Still, they don't fall over. They're built for water, not for dignity. Back in the day, and we're talking thousands of years ago, these birds ruled the icy islands of the North Atlantic. From Canada to Northern Europe, the Great Auks Empire was chilly, isolated, and moist. They nested in massive colonies, sometimes tens of thousands strong, on remote rocks where few predators could reach. That's where you are now. Cold, tired, ankle-deep in bird guano, and weirdly at peace. You crouch near one nesting pair. They're doing the bird version of not making eye contact. The female's sitting on a single, giant egg. It looks too big for her body. That egg's shaped like a teardrop, and that's not poetic, it's functional. It stops the egg from rolling off the cliff. Because yeah, this bird lays its precious only child right on the rock. Now let's zoom out. Picture this whole colony from above. You see birds lined up at the edge of the sea. One by one, they tip forward and dive in. That's where they shine. Underwater, they become something else entirely. Sleek, fast, shockingly competent. They chase fish with sudden lunges, weaving through the current like penguins on espresso. But back up here? It's clumsy chaos. The climate around you is brutal. You shiver under gray skies that look the same for days on end. It rains sideways. The wind doesn't blow, it gnaws. You huddle in a hollow, maybe behind a boulder, and imagine doing this for months. That's what the auks did every breeding season. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The great auk wasn't just some fringe oddity. It was a major food source for indigenous Arctic communities. The Inuit, for example, hunted them not just for meat, but for their warm, waterproof feathers. Their bones have turned up in ancient middens, refuse heaps of long-vanished villages, along with seal skulls and whalebone sled runners. Now, the quirky bit. European sailors in the early 1500s thought great auks were some kind of fish. Not metaphorically. Like, oh yeah, that's a fish that walks around. They'd log them in ship records next to cod and herring. One explorer even claimed the bird swam like a salmon and squealed like a pig, which is both wrong and unforgettable. As for open scholarly debates, There's this. Historians still argue whether the early Norse explorers hunted the great auk out of necessity or out of boredom. The sagas mention strange birds from the Western Islands that were caught in bulk and tossed into soup pots. But whether they understood the ecological impact of clubbing entire colonies into extinction, that's still up for grabs. By now, you've been on this island long enough to appreciate the rhythm, the dull sounds, the huddled shapes. The smell seeps into your clothes. Your mind starts to float. Time slows down in this world. Nothing's urgent, nothing's elegant. But you start to feel a strange pity for these birds. They're not just doomed, they're unaware of being doomed. Their islands shrink, their eggs vanish, and their swimming gets them nowhere in the end. Still, they repeat the ritual. Year after year. Show up, lay the egg, hope for the best. A storm rolls in. The clouds press down like a wet ceiling. The birds tuck their heads and brace. And you, lying there beside them, feel the water pooling under your ribs. It's not pleasant, but it's honest. There's no deception here. Just birds doing their best badly. You wonder what it must have felt like to be a sailor passing these cliffs. Cold, lost, surviving on salted pork and wine gone sour. Then suddenly, land. Cliffs covered in motionless birds. And if you're starving, they're not just birds. They're dinner that doesn't run. Still, the bird doesn't know. It never panics. Never even tries to fight. It just is. And as you drift further into this foggy memory, you realize that's the whole point. These weren't flashy creatures. They weren't built to win. They were built to endure, quietly, until they couldn't anymore. The sea crashes below. The air tastes like regret. And the bird next to you lets out one slow, nasal grunt before falling asleep on its egg. Good call. You wake up cold because of course you do. There's no comfort on this jagged pile of volcanic rock. Just mist, wind, and the heavy silence of birds that never bothered to learn how to fly. The great auks are still here, still motionless, still half asleep, still weirdly dignified for something that looks like a penguin that lost a bet. You watch one of them slip into the water again, and here's the surprise. It's fast. Not just for a bird, fast, but legit impressive. Like a knife slicing under the surface. It shoots past kelp beds and rocks like it's chasing something it lost in a past life. That's what evolution gave the auk instead of flight, hydrodynamic power. You follow it for a bit because there's nothing else to do. It darts through the shallows, shadow-like. This is the moment you realize something weird. Evolution didn't forget the auk. It just pivoted. At one point, these birds could fly. Not well, probably not gracefully, but enough to escape a predator or two. Then, gradually, they gave it up. Their wings shrunk down into stubby, stiff paddles. Hollow bones grew heavier. Chest muscles, used for flapping, shrank, while leg and shoulder muscles went full gym rat. The whole bird redesigned itself for the sea, not the sky. Which is a bold choice, considering all the things in the sea that also want to eat birds. Still, the auk wasn't exactly being reckless. It traded one skill for another. Flying was fine, but not as useful when your food lives underwater and the nearest tree is 600 miles away. So the great auk stopped pretending to be something it wasn't and doubled down on swimming. Here's a real historical fact to slip into your pocket. The great auk was one of the largest seabirds in the northern hemisphere. Standing about 2.5 feet tall, weighing around 10 pounds, it was built like a bowling pin wearing a wetsuit. Its beak had grooves, like someone scratched lines into it with a coin. Scientists think those grooves helped with mating displays or maybe gripping slippery prey. Or both. It's always both. Now, let's throw in something more offbeat. In 1534, French explorer Jacques Cartier's crew stopped off at an island near Newfoundland and recorded catching over 1,000 great auks in one day. With their hands. No traps, no nets. Just guys walking around, scooping up birds like groceries. It's hard to imagine now, but at that point, the auk was so abundant and so nonchalant that it didn't bother fleeing. You can almost see the scene. A wooden ship anchored nearby. Cold waves slapping the hull. Crewmen sloshing through surf with bags and clubs, chuckling like they just discovered fast food. The auks don't even panic. They just kind of shift around, annoyed. Maybe one of them honks. So here's the open question. Historians still argue whether the auk's loss of flight was a fatal flaw or a brilliant adaptation that only failed because of humans. Nature, left alone, might have let these birds survive another 1,000 years. But once people showed up with hunger and firewood, things turned grim. Back on your island, the sun barely peeks through the cloud cover. It's a moody kind of light, gray filtered through more gray. The auks are nesting, or at least trying to. They don't really build nests. They just plop down on bare rock and call it a day. It's not laziness, it's practicality. No trees, no twigs, no grass. What are you supposed to do? Weave a nest out of seaweed and regret. You scoot a little closer to one nest. It's just a smooth spot in the stone, lightly coated in guano, with a single pear-shaped egg sitting in the center like it owns the place. The bird next to it turns its head slightly, watching you with the patient suspicion of a librarian. Suddenly there's movement. 2 auks scuffle nearby. If you were expecting a dramatic fight, lower your expectations. It's mostly neck-waggling and chest-puffing. One lets out a hoarse croak. The other responds with what sounds like a broken foghorn. Eventually, they just stop. It's not really a battle. It's a deeply awkward conversation. Another auk waddles into view with something in its beak. Not food. A pebble. But no one really knows. Some researchers think it's a nesting ritual. Others say it's boredom. Or maybe it's just bird mischief. The kind of thing you do when you've got nothing but fish and existential dread on the menu. Speaking of fish, you glance down at the waterline. It's thick with herring and capelin, all flickering like liquid static. This is where the auk thrives. It dives in into it. 30 seconds later, it resurfaces with a fish flapping in its beak. That's how it feeds the chick. No regurgitation nonsense. Just sushi delivery, fresh and intact. And those chicks? They grow fast. 1 egg per pair, 1 chick per season. That's it. No backups, no clutch of spares. It's a tightrope every time. And yet they did this for centuries, millennia even. Before we showed up, before harpoons and specimen jars, the auks had this whole steady, boring rhythm of survival. But again, boring doesn't mean weak. This was a bird engineered for a very specific set of circumstances. Cold water. Isolated islands. Lots of fish. No humans. It nailed 3 out of 4. You lean back on the rock and close your eyes for a moment. Your ears fill with the soft lap of waves and the occasional wet shuffle of webbed feet. Somewhere nearby, 2 birds are hunking at each other in what may or may not be romance. The wind threads through your hair like a wet comb. And just when you're drifting again, one of the birds sneezes. It's not a cute sneeze. It sounds like a cough, a choke, and a hiccup had an awkward baby. You laugh softly. The auk doesn't care. It doesn't need your approval. It's been doing this since the last ice age. Imagine that. This bird has outlived glaciers. Entire continents of ice have come and gone, and it just kept swimming, nesting, muttering, and sneezing. It watched the mammoths die off. It existed before cities. And what did it need to do all that? Nothing fancy. Just swim well, lay 1 egg, don't die. It's humbling in a strange way. You, with your smartphone and your too loud brain, need sleep playlists and breathing exercises. Just give it fish and a flat rock, and it'll live its whole life without a single identity crisis. You open your eyes again. The light hasn't changed much. Time drips slowly out here. The birds haven't moved more than a few feet. It's the same view, the same cold, the same stubborn stillness. But you notice it now, not as monotony, but as stability. No panic. No urgency. Just a bird that made a trade. Wings for flippers. Sky for sea. Elegance for certainty. It didn't always pay off. But it made sense at the time. You're crouched near the water again, watching a great auk do what it was actually good at. It slips beneath the surface without a splash, just a whisper of motion, and then it's gone, vanished into the Atlantic like a pebble dropped in a well. You lean over and try to follow, but there's only your reflection, warped and ghostly. Just a flicker. The auk darts by under the water, chasing a school of capelin. It's fast, almost graceful. And this is the secret no one gives these birds credit for. The great auk couldn't fly, sure. But in the water? It was a torpedo in a tuxedo. You slide down the rocks and let your legs hang over the edge, your boots soaked instantly. Below you, the auks are gliding. They use their stubby wings like fins, beating them against the water in fast, tight arcs. It's not paddling, it's flying underwater. That's not a poetic metaphor. It's literal. Their whole flight mechanism just got reassigned. They dive deep, twist mid-hunt, lunge at silver flashes of fish, and shoot back up with barely a breath between. It's not exactly Olympic-level choreography. Sometimes they miss. Sometimes they panic and turn too fast and float up awkwardly like a popped balloon. But mostly they get what they came for, fish. Small ones. Slippery ones. The kind that blink out of sight unless you're fast, focused, and perfectly suited to chasing your food through freezing saltwater. So here's your mainstream historical nugget. The auk could stay underwater for over 2 minutes per dive and reach depths close to 75 meters. That's deeper than most humans would ever bother going without a pressurized suit and a poor sense of risk. Their bones were denser than most birds, less buoyant, more stable, and their muscles were oxygen-packed for endurance. They weren't just swimmers. They were divers with built-in scuba gear. You watch a juvenile auk practicing. It's not good. It bobs more than it dives. Flaps its wings like it's still hoping to take off one day. But you can see the instinct kicking in. The twitch of the head. The tilt before the dive. A slow, awkward blur of movement that somehow ends with it popping up again, fish in beak. Now let's slip in something weirder. A fringe fact you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Some 18th century naturalists swore the auk had eyelids of dual-layered membrane, which allegedly helped it see better underwater. Most of that's probably overblown, but they did have protective nictitating membranes, a kind of biological goggles they could blink across their eyes while swimming. Sharks have them too. So do owls. You just squint and hope. Still, it's one thing to admire this bird in isolation, gliding through cold water, living its best aquatic life. It's another thing to consider what it meant. Because here's the real question historians whisper over brandy and bad lighting. Was the great auk the best swimmer of all seabirds? No one's come to a consensus. Puffins are more versatile. Penguins are more iconic. But for raw diving utility, some argue the auk was in a class of its own. You ease back onto the rock, chin resting on your arms, and let your breath slow. The scene in front of you is, let's be honest, repetitive. Auks dive, auks surface, auks dive again. Occasionally one flaps its wings on land like it forgot it can't take off. They all have the same awkward, lopsided waddle. They all look like old men in dinner jackets who just realized they're at the wrong wedding. But they're consistent. And there's something oddly soothing about that. No drama. No flock freakouts. Just wet, patient persistence. A young auk climbs out of the water and shuffles toward you. It stops a few feet away, dripping, blinking like it's never seen a person this close. You both stare at each other. It squawks once, short, unimpressed. Then it waddles past, ignoring you completely. Classic. The colony hums with low noises. No song, remember. These birds never develop the melodic calls of terns or gulls. Their voices are soft grunts, moans, and weird choking honks. It's not pretty. It's not romantic. But it works for them. You stand up and stretch. The wind kicks harder now. The temperature drops without warning, and your breath turns visible. The auks don't flinch. Their feathers are thick and layered, more like fur. Underneath, a skin layer coated in natural oils, perfect for waterproofing. You don't see them preen like swans or peacocks. Maintenance here is minimal. This is a bird optimized for damp misery. But let's talk about movement, because this is where things get almost philosophical. On land, the auk moves like it's lost a bet. One foot flops forward, then the next. Arms, or wings, flap for balance. The tail sticks out like a useless rudder. It takes 5 waddles to go 2 feet. But in the water? Streamlined grace. That contrast is key. It's a bird divided between worlds, awkward and exposed above the surface, agile and confident below. You feel it in your own bones. That tension between where you are and where you're best suited to be. You watch two birds emerge from the water and shake off in unison. It's not synchronized, but it's close enough. They stand together, motionless, looking out at the ocean as if expecting something. A storm? A ship? A miracle? They get none of the above. Here's the part you don't expect. Even though they couldn't fly, the great auks migrated. That's the twist. In winter, they left their breeding islands and rode ocean currents south. Nobody's entirely sure how far they went, but fossil remains have been found as far south as Florida and southern Spain. So, once breeding was done, these little aquatic bowling pins just floated their way halfway across the Atlantic. Historians still argue whether they traveled in large groups or solo, following instinct alone. Some theories suggest they timed their migrations with oceanic fish swarms, like herring booms. Others think they drifted passively with the current. Either way, imagine that. A species so confident in its swimming that it crossed oceans without a single wing beat. You try to picture it. A foggy horizon, a dozen auks bobbing like corks, vanishing into gray nothing. No compass. No anchor. Just the knowledge that food's probably somewhere ahead and cold is everywhere. The wind howls louder now. A few birds hunker down beside rocks, tucking their heads under their wings. You do the same, pulling your jacket tighter, trying to stay still. The cold seeps in, but the rhythm stays. The waves keep lapping. The birds keep diving. The story doesn't shift. It just loops. And that's the strange comfort in all this. The monotony. The predictability. These birds didn't evolve to be flexible. They evolved to do one thing well, and they did it for thousands of years. Fish, dive, nest, repeat. No variation. No drama. And somehow, that was enough. Until it wasn't. But we're not there yet. For now, you're just another figure sitting among the colony. Watching, breathing, fading into their rhythm. One dive at a time. You wake up to the sound of something wet slapping against something else wet. It's not elegant. It's not rhythmic. But it's real. And it's coming from two auks trying, and failing, to impress each other. You sit up slowly. Everything's damp. Your clothes. Your hair. The air itself. This isn't a place where things dry off. But you're getting used to that. The monotony is starting to feel gentle. Over by the rocks, the social lives of great auks are on full display, which is to say, they are awkward, minimal, and weirdly intense. Courtship among these birds is a strange combination of indifference and overcommitment. There are no soaring aerial dances, no bright plumage flares, no swoony duets. Just grunting, low bowing motions, and the occasional nibble at each other's beaks. You watch a pair that's clearly working something out. One waddles in a tight circle around the other, who stares straight ahead like it's ignoring a roommate's monologue. Then the circler stops, leans forward, and rubs its massive, grooved beak against the other's chest. It's tender in that stiff, prehistoric kind of way. Here's the catch. They mate for the season. Not always for life. It depends. Some pairs return to each other year after year. Others move on. But they're selective. You don't just show up with a pebble and expect results. The great auks romance game is long, slow, and mostly silent. Mainstream historical fact? These birds had a breeding ritual that locked in once a year, usually late spring or early summer. Thousands of them would return to the same nesting site, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles, just to find that one rocky ledge they remembered from the year before. Always the same place. Always the same slippery spot on the cliff. If someone else beat them to it, tough luck. And that nesting site? It mattered. Because the egg, singular, remember, was everything. One shot per season. That teardrop-shaped egg sat exposed on the rock, sometimes dangerously close to a cliff edge. But its shape helped prevent disaster. Teardrop eggs don't roll in a straight line. They spin in a tight circle. So if the wind kicks up, it might wobble, but it usually won't fall. Still, it was a gamble. One egg. One shot. No insurance policy. You can see why the pair bond mattered. They had to trust each other. One to fish, the other to guard. And if one vanished, the egg was done for. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. There are 19th century records of people stealing these eggs for their mantelpieces. Not to eat, just to own. Victorian collectors would pay obscene amounts for an auk egg, especially if it had unusual markings or a visible embryo inside. One British aristocrat reportedly kept a lucky auk egg in his coat pocket for years until it cracked during a fox hunt. Imagine explaining that to your dry cleaner. As you watch, another pair begins the transfer. One parent waddles back from the water, fishless but attentive. The other stands, carefully, and shifts slightly to let their partner inspect the egg. They grunt. It's almost a ceremony. Eventually, they swap spots. One flops back down onto the egg like a beanbag chair. The other ambles off to the sea. No fuss. No thanks. The logic behind the single egg strategy? Probably resource-based. The ocean's full of fish, sure, but the act of catching, feeding, and protecting takes energy. Risk is everywhere: gulls, storms, starvation. Raising 2 chicks would have doubled the odds of failure. So nature made a call: one is enough. One done well is better than 2 lost. But here's the kicker. Even with all that investment, yearly migration, monogamous bonding, elaborate nesting, most auk chicks didn't survive. Predators raided colonies. Eggs got cracked in storms. Sometimes the adults just didn't come back. And still, the birds came back each year. Same rock. Same dance. Same stubborn hope. You crouch near the edge of the colony and watch a group of unmated auks milling around. These are the outcasts, the floaters, the ones who showed up too late or lost their partners. They linger on the periphery, occasionally trying their luck with gentle beak touches or low calls. Mostly they're ignored. One of them starts mimicking nesting behavior, nudging at a stone, shifting its body as if incubating something that isn't there. Some researchers think this is a stress behavior, a way to cope with failure. Others call it displaced nesting. Either way, it's quietly heartbreaking. A bird sitting on a dream of an egg that never existed. Historians still argue whether the auk's rigid nesting fidelity, always returning to the same spots, was a fatal design flaw. On one hand, it kept colonies tight and communal, easy to defend. On the other, it made them predictable. Once humans found a colony, they could wipe it out. And the birds? They just return the next year to an empty rock and do it all again. You look around the colony, imagining this scene repeating across centuries. Generations born, raised, lost. Thousands of birds performing the same rituals, year after year, on the same rocks, under the same skies. There's something ancient about it. Something so deeply wired into them that even extinction couldn't shake it, until it did. The wind shifts. A light drizzle starts falling. The auks don't react. Their waterproof feathers shed the drops like nothing. You pull your hood tighter. They just blink. Maybe grunt. It's hard to say if they even notice weather anymore. Off to the side, you spot 2 juveniles huddled together. They're fuzzy still, gray down covering their heads and bellies. They chirp softly, not the guttural adult grunt, but a high, tinny whimper. They look like they've just realized the world is much colder than they thought. One of the adults approaches, fish in beak. It doesn't hand it over gently. It basically shoves the fish into the chick's face. The chick panics, then swallows. Done. No bonding moment. No applause. Just survival. Another adult returns, shaking off seawater, and lets out a strange, rhythmic noise, a sort of clicking gurgle. It sounds almost content. As content as a bird can sound after swimming for hours in freezing water and delivering a fish with 0 thanks. You rest your head on your knees. The colony sounds fade into white noise, grunts, squawks, waves, wind. It's not music, but it's steady, predictable. And maybe that's the whole point. These birds weren't designed to thrive in chaos. They were designed to repeat, to endure, to pass down rituals so old that no one even questioned them. And yes, it didn't save them in the end, but it carried them through millennia, through ice ages, through storms that erased coastlines, through years when fish vanished and years when predators got bold. That has to count for something. You wake up to shouting. Not human shouting, more like angry seagulls arguing over a parking space. You open one eye. A fight is happening maybe 6 feet away, and the combatants are 3 puffed-up gulls and a pair of very irritated great auks. You've stumbled into one of the less peaceful aspects of auk parenting, egg theft. You sit up slowly. The drama's already winding down. One gull limps off, pecked hard across the beak. Another makes a grab at the auk nest, misses, and flaps away squawking. The auks stand guard, unmoving, solid, furious. One of them makes that low, nasal growl that sounds more like indigestion than anger. So yeah, eggs. The one item on this island more valuable than a warm, dry jacket. And not just to the birds. Great auk eggs were weirdly iconic. Big, about 6 inches long, and cream-colored, often covered in streaks, splotches, or what you might call artistic squiggles. Each one had a slightly different pattern. Some looked like abstract ink blots. Others, like someone dropped a pen in a panic. That uniqueness made them irresistible to predators, and eventually to people. Back in the old days, before everything went sideways, the colony could afford a few lost eggs. But over time, that loss rate became less natural selection and more every jerk with a bag and a stick wants one. Here's your historical fact. By the early 1800s, a single intact great auk egg could fetch a higher price in Europe than a skilled laborer earned in several months. Museum collectors, private obsessives, and Victorian eccentrics all wanted one. Some wanted several. And because each bird laid only one per season, every stolen egg was a potential extinction event. You picture the scene, a collector's parlor, full of mahogany cabinets and self-importance. A man in a velvet coat holds up a fragile, speckled egg with tweezers. He probably calls it a fine specimen. He definitely doesn't think about the bird that sat on that rock for weeks, rain-soaked and fish-starved, just to give that egg a shot. Now for the quirky bit. One Danish collector in 1840 was known for his bizarre system of egg display. He glued a strand of his own hair to each shell to symbolize the delicate link between man and nature. One of those eggs shattered when his cat jumped on the shelf. Nature bites back. Back on the island, the auks don't know any of this. But they can feel it in a way. You see it in how they cluster tighter now. The way they grunt more when something flies overhead. The fact that some of them stand, not sit, over their eggs, watching, like bouncers guarding a velvet rope. You spot a group of gulls circling again. Opportunists. They wait until a parent leaves to fish, then swoop in. Sometimes they get lucky. More often, the remaining auk lunges and chases them off. But even a few seconds of distraction can mean a shattered shell and one more silent, empty spot on the ledge. And humans? We were the worst gulls of all. See, once people figured out where these nesting sites were, it was game over. Eggs were stolen in bulk. In armloads. Not one or two, but dozens. Some were eaten on the spot. Because yes, they were considered tasty, like fishy chicken eggs. Others were carted back across oceans, packed in hay, and sold to men in mustaches for obscene sums. Historians still argue whether early egg collectors understood they were driving the species toward collapse, or whether they just didn't care. Some left behind field notes that suggest guilt. Others, none at all. There's a long letter from 1838 where one British gentleman wrote, "I fear I may be among the last to obtain one freshly laid, and thus I treasure it more." Treasure it more. Because it might be the last. If there's a more Victorian way to say, oops, no one's found it yet. And yet, you kind of get it. As you walk slowly through the colony, watching parents lean in over their mottled eggs, you feel the weight of them. These things are beautiful. Not polished. Not perfect. But each one's different, like a stone rolled by a specific tide. A miniature relic of persistence. You crouch near a pair standing over an egg that's cracked, not from hatching. From impact. The shell split down one side, yolk dried in a dark smear on the stone. The parents don't leave. They just stand there. Maybe they don't realize it's dead. Maybe they do and don't care. Maybe there's nothing else to do. You stay there for a while. Not saying anything. Not moving. Just listening to the gulls, the sea, the low grunts of birds trying to keep something alive. Then a sound cuts through, a human footstep. You turn, but no one's there. Just your imagination. Still, the presence is in your head now, what it would have felt like to be the one approaching with a satchel and a stick. Maybe you were hungry. Maybe you just wanted something rare. Maybe you convinced yourself the birds didn't matter. It's easy to feel detached in this world of stone and fog. But eggs are intimate, close, fragile in a way bones never are. You look again at the broken one and then further along the rock shelf, where another bird is laying hers right now. She squats low, shudders once, and then steps off carefully. There it is, a fresh egg, still wet, steaming slightly in the morning chill. The other parent steps in like a relay runner, settles on top, and breathes. You can almost hear it. The pattern continues. Despite everything, despite gulls and storms and hands with burlap sacks, the auks come back. The egg gets laid. The parent keeps watch. One more round of hope. It won't last. But right now, it's all they know. You wake up on a different kind of morning. There's no rain, no fog, just stillness. The kind that makes you feel like something's off, even if you can't put your finger on it. The air's sharp, but clean. The sea is flat. And the colony? Quiet. Way too quiet. You get up and walk slowly between the nests. Something's changed. The birds are still here, still nesting, still guarding their eggs, but they're tense. Some flinch when you pass. Others keep their heads on a swivel. There's an edge to everything now. Because something else has arrived on this rock. Something the auks were never designed for. People. Not curious wanderers. Not kids with binoculars. Not even your well-meaning, overly sentimental museum types. These are hunters. Hungry, cold, desperate. And what they see in front of them is a colony of plump, flightless birds sitting perfectly still. Let's make this plain. The great auk wasn't just harvested, it was processed. It was fuel. It was meat. It was feather insulation and lamp oil and fishing bait. These birds were turned into everything you could want when you're freezing on the edge of the known world and your ship's been out of salt pork since Tuesday. Mainstream history? Seafarers from as far back as the 8th century were known to hunt the great auk on their voyages. The Norse, the Basques, the early Portuguese, they all made pit stops on the Auk Islands. Not because the birds were majestic, but because they were predictable. You could rely on them to show up, lay eggs, and sit still long enough to be clubbed. No traps needed. No weapons really. Just hands. Or sticks. Or rocks. The Norsemen had a name for them, Geirfugl. Literally, spear bird. Which is a pretty generous term for something that never even looked at a spear without immediately dying. Here's the thing. We love to romanticize survival. We picture weathered sailors with leather faces and frostbitten toes, scraping together just enough food to make it home. But survival often comes at a cost. And for the auk, it was the cost. You walk a little farther and stop dead. There are bones here. Real ones. Mostly bird, scattered, bleached, splintered. A few feathers caught in the cracks between rocks. Nothing fresh. Just echoes. Like this place once held thousands of birds and now it holds silence. Back in the 1500s, when European ships started exploring the North Atlantic in earnest, the great auk was everywhere. Newfoundland, Iceland, Greenland, the Orkney Islands. They nested in numbers so huge, early accounts say, the land boiled with them. You could land a longboat, swing a club a few times, and have dinner for the crew. But as human ships grew more numerous, something else happened. Feathers became currency. Here's your quirky fact. Great auk feathers were the down of choice for stuffing mattresses and pillows in the 17th and 18th centuries. They were waterproof, dense, and incredibly warm. And the way to get them was horrifyingly simple. You'd corral the birds into pens, club them to death one by one, then pluck them. By the thousands. In some cases, the birds were stripped alive and left to die. If you feel a little sick, good. That means you're still awake. And it wasn't just feather merchants. Whale hunters used auk meat as bait. Arctic expeditions packed barrels of smoked auk meat for protein. There are even records of people using auk oil to grease wooden sleds. Every part of the bird had a job, except staying alive. You sit on a flat rock now, overlooking the waves. Try to imagine what it would have looked like. A fire going, smoke drifting upward. Piles of bodies. The smell of burning blubber. Men laughing, drinking, passing time while the birds screamed and flapped in circles around them. Except they didn't really scream. Remember that? No loud cry. Just low, useless grunts. A protest no one could hear or bother to. Historians still argue whether the auk was wiped out by subsistence hunting or by the arrival of the commercial feather trade. In reality, it was both. And neither. It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 little ones. Auks weren't hunted to extinction in a single bloodbath. They were erased in slow motion. You get up and start walking. Around the bend of the island, you find something strange. A trench cut into the rock. Shallow, lined with blackened stones. A cooking pit, 1,000 years old, maybe, left behind by someone who just wanted to stay alive another night. You don't hate them for it, but you don't forget either. This is the moment where the monotony cracks. Up until now, this has all been seabird ASMR. Waddling, nesting, diving, repeat. But this is the pivot. This is the first time humans and auks lock eyes across the ledge, and only one of them walks away. One more detail for you. There's a report from a 1785 whaling ship logbook, found an auk isle. Gathered 200 birds, 25 eggs, and 4 barrels of fat. Birds do not flee. Not even when struck. That's not a poetic exaggeration. That's cold, nautical fact. The birds didn't run. Couldn't run. Didn't know how. Why would they? They'd been safe for millennia. No natural predators on these remote islands. No need for flight. No urgency. Just fish and stone and time. That innocence was their design flaw. But you keep walking. You come across a newer graveyard. Not bones this time, tools. A broken or a rusted blade. A fragment of what might have been a barrel hoop. You're standing in a place where survival was transactional. Birds for food. Feathers for comfort. Lives for warmth. And the birds kept coming. The next season. And the one after that. They didn't know. Or maybe they knew and did it anyway because that's what they were. A body that returned. An egg laid in the same spot. A pattern even as the pattern turned fatal. You close your eyes. Try to hear what this island sounded like when it was alive. Thousands of birds, the shuffle of webbed feet, the plop of bodies into cold water, the soft hum of wind through feathers. No voices. No warnings. Then silence. Then footsteps. Then fire. You're back on the island. But now, everything's different. There's no bird song, no flutter of wings, just the wind dragging itself over bare rock and water slapping lazily against the shore. You're standing on the bones of a memory, and this time, the silence isn't just eerie. It's final. This is where it starts to get brutal. Not the slow, creeping decline from before. This is the sharp drop. The part in the chart where the red line tanks and never recovers. It's the 1800s now. The great auk is already in trouble, though it doesn't know it. You standing here you do. Because you know what's coming. And you wish you didn't. There's no mystery left, no edge of the map. Humans have charted most of the auk's world. Hunters know the nesting spots by heart. Every summer, the same rocky islands fill up with birds and eggs like clockwork. And every summer, more boats show up, filled with men carrying sacks and clubs. See, by this point, most people aren't killing auks because they're starving. They're killing them because it's easy money. Feathers still fetch a good price. The meat's less valuable now, sure, but it still makes decent bait. And then there's the collectors. Oh boy, the collectors. Here's your mainstream fact. By the mid-19th century, natural history museums and wealthy private collectors had created a new kind of market, the rarity rush. The fewer of something existed in the wild, the more it was worth preserved in a glass case. The moment someone realized the great auk was disappearing, its value skyrocketed. Did auk? Good money. Auk egg? Even better. A stuffed pear with a labeled origin? Jepa. That's the setup. The weapon wasn't just the club. It was also demand. Now, imagine you're a great auk in 1830. You're doing what you've always done. Coming back to the same island, waddling toward the same rock, laying the same single egg. You're not wired to sense danger. You're wired for patterns. For tides and fish and seasons. But instead of fish, what you get is a sack over your head and a sharp crack to the skull. Welcome to the industrialization of extinction. You walk further down the rocky coast and spot the remnants of a temporary camp, Collapsed canvas, rusting pots, a fire pit full of cracked bones. This isn't archaeology anymore. This is a crime scene. One with no trial, no witness, no press. Just absence. Let's get into the details. In the early 1800s, Funk Island, off Newfoundland, was one of the Great Auk's largest colonies. Fishermen described its shores as black with birds. But by 1835, it was nearly empty. Not because the birds had relocated, because they'd been killed. In their tens of thousands. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some expeditions didn't even bother bringing food. They planned to live off the auks entirely. The birds were that reliable. Like canned goods with flippers. There's an 1838 account from a sailor who describes loading a small boat with over 100 auks in an hour. Not caught with nets. Not shot with guns. Just picked up. One by one. Like fruit off a bush. You sit down now because it's heavy and you feel it. There's something especially cruel about a creature that doesn't fight back. That doesn't run. That trusts the pattern. By the 1840s, things are dire. Reports come in from naturalists, pleading with governments to protect the remaining auks. Iceland's parliament bans auk hunting. Britain issues some vague conservation orders. But it's too little. Too late. Because here's what people didn't factor in. The great auk laid one egg per year. If that egg was crushed or stolen or eaten, it was over. There was no backup. No clutch. No rebound. You remember those ridiculous egg thieves from earlier?
Yeah.
They're still around. Only now they're not stealing for breakfast. They're stealing for auctions. London collectors. Paris museums. Vienna taxidermists. Eggs are packed in moss and straw and sailed across oceans like crown jewels. Some go for today's equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars. One collector brags in a letter that he paid for his country estate with auk relics alone. Historians still argue whether this collector craze was a reflection of growing scientific curiosity or just a desperate grab for prestige. Either way, the bird didn't care. It just died faster. By 1844, the species is functionally gone. There are a few stragglers. Some rumors. Sightings in Greenland. A lone egg in a Danish collection. A blurred photo that might be a bird but also might be a rock. You know how these things go. But the massacre continues even after the bird is technically extinct. Because here's the awful irony. Extinction makes something more valuable. The rarer the auk becomes, the more desperate people are to have a piece of it. A feather. An egg. Imagine being hunted harder after you've already disappeared. You stand again and walk toward the water. Let the breeze hit your face. Let the salt sting your eyes. You picture the last few birds, wide-eyed and blinking as the boats return year after year, looking not just for survival, but for trophies. Here's another story to stick in your head before sleep takes over. On St. Kilda, off the coast of Scotland, a group of islanders killed what may have been the last British great auk in 1840. But because they thought it was a witch. Seriously. The bird had washed up on the beach during a storm. They didn't recognize it. It was huge, black, weird-looking. They tied it up. 3 days later, the storm got worse. So they panicked, and they beat it to death with rocks. Sometimes you can't even write a metaphor. Reality handles it for you. This wasn't extinction by miscalculation. This was extinction by ritual. Repeated. Blunt. Familiar. The final act in a slow, dumb tragedy that played out in real time and no one bothered to stop it until the credits rolled. You take one last look around. The nests are gone. The birds are gone. All that's left is the wind and the sea and the endless, empty rocks. This is what clubbing season leaves behind. The rocks feel heavier now. The silence is deeper. You've been walking for what feels like hours across the same jagged coastline, except now it's not the birds you're following, it's the ghost trail they left behind. And every step carries the weight of something that's not coming back. You keep going, because there's still a little more to see. Or maybe to reckon with. Let's talk about what happens after extinction. After the last bird falls, after the last egg is cracked, and the last call echoes off a cliff and doesn't come back. You'd think that would be the end of the story. But here's the thing. Humans are terrible at letting things die quietly. What follows is a strange and unsettling phase in the Great Auk saga, the posthumous frenzy. When the bird was gone, people wanted it even more. Just not alive. You step into a dark room. Not on the island now. In a museum. Glass cases line the walls, and inside are mounted auks. Some upright, some squatting, all unnervingly frozen. Their feathers are dusty, their eyes made of glass, their wings set in what someone once decided looked natural. It doesn't. Nothing about it feels right. There are just over 70 known stuffed great auks in the world today. That's it. 70-ish bodies in display cases from London to Reykjavik. Each one locked in time. Each one assigned a serial number like an exhibit at a crime scene. And this is your mainstream fact. Most of these taxidermied auks weren't mounted while the birds were still common. No, nearly all of them were prepared after people realized the species was vanishing. Suddenly, everyone wanted one. Not to help. Not to breed. Just to have. Ownership became a kind of immortality. Let's go back to the very end. There's one story, famous now, about the last confirmed pair of great auks, found on Eldey Island, off Iceland, in 1844. 2 birds, 1 egg. You're probably already guessing how this ends. 3 men landed on the island. Saw the birds. Caught them. The male was strangled on the spot. The female panicked, flapping uselessly with her tiny wings, and was also killed. During the struggle, the egg was crushed beneath a boot. Historians still argue whether this was a targeted act. Were they knowingly collecting the final pair? Or were they just going through the motions of another day's hunt? Either way, it ended here. No survivors. No secret nests. No, maybe one day we'll find another. Just this. The birds were sent off to collectors. 1 body went to Denmark. 1 to a museum in Iceland. The crushed egg? But you press your forehead against the glass now, staring at one of these preserved birds. It looks almost bored, as if it knows it's part of someone else's mistake. Let's get into something a little weirder, the auction years. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, great auk remains became the crown jewels of natural history auctions. A single toe bone could sell for more than a painting. Skulls were swapped between institutions like rare coins. And the eggs? Forget about it. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 1971, a single great auk egg sold at Sotheby's for the equivalent of over $20,000. And it wasn't even in perfect condition. It had a tiny crack. The buyer kept it in a vault. Because nothing says, oops, our species did this, quite like storing the evidence in a bank. It's not just museums. Universities got into the game too. Each one wanted their own specimen. Their own representative of extinction. Some displayed the birds with solemn placards. Others posed them in awkward dioramas next to unrelated species. There's one in Scotland, shoved beside a penguin, as if their only connection was flightless and sad. And here's something no one talks about, the fake auks. Because demand got so absurd, forgeries cropped up, stuffed guillemots or razorbills repainted and reshaped to look like great auks. Some were convincing. Some were laughably bad. One even had glued-on wings made from chicken feathers. But they still sold. Because people weren't really paying for the bird. They were paying for the symbol. The thing they missed. The thing they killed. You step back outside, blinking in the daylight. Back to the coast, back to where this all started. Only now the cliffs are bare, the nests are cold, and the silence isn't peaceful. It's accusing. You think about how many times humans have done this. Not just with birds. With everything. Kill it, collect it, grieve it, then enshrine it. We're experts at building memorials to the things we destroy. There's even a term for it now, conservation through regret. It's when you realize too late that something mattered, and the only thing left to do is put up a plaque and swear never again. Until the next time. Here's one last story before you sleep. In the early 1900s, a scientist in Germany claimed to have found a living great auk off the coast of Greenland. He swore he saw it with his own eyes, large, upright, waddling along the shore. He spent years trying to prove it, mounted expeditions, published papers, even drew maps. Nothing ever came of it. Historians still argue whether he saw something real or whether it was just guilt in the shape of a bird. You sit down again, facing the sea. The rocks feel warmer now, or maybe you're just numb. A gull cries overhead, and for half a second, your heart jumps. But it's just a gull. Not everything extinct leaves a silence. Some things leave echoes, scraps, shells, labels under glass. But the great auk? It left a shape we still see when we look at the ocean and imagine what should be there. You close your eyes. The museum doors are shut now. The eggs are locked in their drawers. The collectors are long dead. But the story doesn't fade. It sits, waiting every time we say, we won't let this happen again. And then do. You're back on the edge of the ocean again, but this time the story drifts into something more unexpected. How the great auk left its mark beyond just feathers and bones. Because here's the thing. Extinction is rarely neat. It's messy, it's scattered, and it often sneaks into places you wouldn't expect. For starters, the great auk wasn't just a bird. It was a player in human culture, economy, and even folklore. You might think of it as just another species lost to history, but its disappearance rippled through communities that depended on it for centuries. Take the fishermen along the North Atlantic coasts. Their livelihoods weren't just about fish. The great auk was part of their toolkit. The meat fed hungry mouths, the feathers stuffed mattresses, and the oil-lit lamps. It was a resource so reliable, it became part of the local economy's backbone. Here's your mainstream fact. In Iceland and parts of Newfoundland, auk hunting was practiced seasonally, integrated into a cycle that balanced harvesting and breeding, for a time, at least. Generations grew up knowing the auk's habits, the timing of their migrations, and the nuances of their calls. That cultural rhythm vanished along with the birds. But it wasn't just economics. The auk also weaved itself into myths and stories. In some North Atlantic communities, it was seen as a harbinger of luck or misfortune. Fishermen told tales about auk spirits guiding them through storms or warning of bad catches. Some legends even suggested the auk's black and white plumage symbolized balance between sea and land, life and death. Your quirky tidbit. In the Shetland Islands, there was a belief that killing a great auk would bring bad luck, storms, lost nets, or sickness among the crew. Ironically, this superstition didn't stop hunting but gave the auk a kind of mystical status in the local psyche. You watch the waves, imagining those ancient sailors setting out before dawn, glancing toward auk colonies and hoping for good fortune. What would it have been like to live in a world where this awkward, flightless bird mattered so much? You also start to think about how the auk's extinction left a gap in the ecosystem. Without these heavy, fish-eating birds, the balance of prey and predator shifted. Other species filled the niche, but never quite the same way. Historians and ecologists still argue whether the auk's disappearance caused significant changes in marine food webs or if nature just adapted smoothly. Some suggest the loss may have allowed gull populations to boom, contributing to increased egg predation on other seabirds. Others think the impact was minor and localized. Either way, the auk's absence was felt beyond just empty nests. You spot a cluster of razorbills and puffins nearby, modern relatives of the auk. They're smaller, more agile, able to fly. But their calls echo faintly of their lost cousin. Watching them dive and emerge with fish, you realize they carry on the story, imperfect but persistent. Here's the kicker. Some scientists today study these species not just for their own sake, but as living reminders of what was lost. Monitoring their populations helps us understand how extinction reshapes ecosystems, and what we might do to prevent future disappearances. You lean back on a cool rock and consider the auk's legacy. It's not just about a bird no longer here. It's about human choices, cultural shifts, and the delicate threads tying nature and society together. You think about how extinction can be both a cautionary tale and a mirror. We see in the auk's story reflections of greed, ignorance, care, and sometimes respect. The waves keep rolling. The gulls squawk and swoop. The sun warms your face. The past isn't gone. It's layered beneath your feet, folded into the salt air, whispered through the wind. And you're part of that story now, too. You're back on the rocky ledge where the auks once gathered, but now your mind starts to wander into a different territory. How the great auk has shaped the way we think about extinction itself. Before the great auk vanished, extinction was mostly a theoretical idea. something rare, mysterious, and distant. A few shells and bones found in strange places, maybe. But nothing immediate, nothing in your backyard. Then the auk happened. Suddenly, extinction became real and personal. The bird wasn't just missing. It was gone forever, a black and white emblem of what happens when humans mess with the balance. Here's your mainstream fact. The great auk was one of the first widely publicized cases of a species going extinct due to human activity. Its disappearance helped push scientists and thinkers to ask harder questions about conservation, stewardship, and responsibility. People started wondering, what else could disappear if we weren't careful? Could whole ecosystems collapse? Could humanity itself be next? And from there, a whole movement began. The seeds of modern conservation were planted, partly because of the auk's tragic story. Laws, protections, wildlife preserves, all rooted in a growing awareness that nature isn't infinite. But that's just one side of the coin. Your quirky tidbit: the great auk's extinction also inspired early environmental art and literature. Poets wrote elegies to the bird. Painters captured its solemn form. One 19th century lithograph even depicted the auk as a martyr, draped in chains and surrounded by grieving sailors. It was the original extinction icon, long before pandas or polar bears took the stage. But there's a debate here that historians still argue. Did the auk's story truly spark environmental awareness? Or was it just another sad chapter in a long line of human-caused losses, ignored until it was too late? Some argue the auk was a warning shouted into the void, that people kept hunting and collecting long after they knew better. Others see it as a catalyst that shaped policy and public perception. Either way, the auk's legacy lingers. You think about how its story is still told, retold, and reinterpreted. How it's a cautionary tale but also a symbol of hope. Because once we admit we're capable of destroying, maybe we can learn to protect. You glance over the empty nests, imagine the rhythmic shuffle of thousands of auks, and wonder what this place would be like if those birds were still here. Would fishermen still depend on them? Would scientists still study their curious courtship dances? Or would they have just become background noise, part of a balanced ecosystem no one thought twice about? The question hangs in the salty air. You watch a puffin dive nearby, sleek and agile, and think about the lessons hidden in its flight. About what it means to survive when your cousin couldn't. And about what's still at stake for the creatures we share this planet with today. You lean against a boulder, the sun setting low behind you. The story of the great auk isn't finished. It's just a chapter. One written in feathers, bones, greed, regret, and a stubborn beat of the wings that once were. You find yourself walking along the coastline again, but this time the mood shifts to something quieter, more reflective. You're thinking about the human side of the story, the people who lived alongside the great auk, hunted it, collected it, and, in some cases, mourned its loss. It's easy to imagine hunters and fishermen as villains in this tale, but the reality is messier. Many communities depended on the auk for survival. On remote islands and coasts, where food options were scarce and winters harsh, the auk was a steady, if unwelcome, provider. Here's your mainstream fact. In Newfoundland, some indigenous groups and early settlers included great auk in their diets and toolkits, not as sport or greed, but as necessity. The birds provided meat, feathers for bedding, and even oil for lamps. The auk was woven into their daily lives. They knew its habits, its seasons, its weaknesses. And for a long time, there was an unspoken balance. Humans took what they needed, but the colony persisted. But that balance didn't last. As global demand grew, for feathers, eggs, specimens, what had been a seasonal harvest turned into industrial-scale slaughter. Your quirky tidbit: on the tiny island of St. Kilda, in the Outer Hebrides, the auk was so intertwined with local life that in the 19th century, the islanders marked auk hunting seasons on their calendars. When the auk disappeared, it wasn't just a loss of a food source. It was a loss of part of their cultural rhythm. This leads to an interesting debate historians still argue. Was the extinction inevitable because of human population growth and industrialization, or could sustainable practices have saved the species? Some scholars point to early conservation efforts, laws in Iceland, petitions in Britain, as hopeful signs. Others say the momentum was too strong, the market for auk products too lucrative. What this really means is that extinction isn't just about biology. It's about economics, culture, and values. You picture a 19th century fisherman standing at dawn, clutching a spear, wondering if the season's catch would be his last auk. Or a Victorian collector brushing dust off a mounted auk, oblivious to the lives that once gave it form. There's a human story beneath the feathers, filled with contradictions, survival and destruction, reverence and exploitation, ignorance and intentionality. And sometimes, you think, the birds paid the price for all of it. You walk past a small stone cairn someone's built. It's a simple memorial, just a pile of rocks with a weathered plaque that reads, "In memory of the great auk, last seen 1844. You pause. The cairn is humble, but it carries weight. It's a reminder that extinction leaves marks not only in nature but in human memory. The wind picks up, rattling loose stones. You imagine voices from long ago, fishermen's calls, collectors' boasts, naturalists' laments, all swirling together like a ghost choir. And somewhere deep beneath that chorus is the auk's own voice. Low, nasal, stubborn. You sit on a rock, feeling the rough texture under your fingers. You realize this story isn't just about the past. It's about how we remember, how we learn, and how we might do better next time. You stand now at the crossroads where history meets modernity, a place where the great auk's shadow still stretches into the present day. It's not just a story locked in dusty books or glass cases. It's one that shapes how we approach nature now. You watch the waves, thinking about how this bird's disappearance shifted science. Suddenly, protecting species became urgent, a race against time rather than a leisurely academic exercise. Here's your mainstream fact. The great auk's extinction helped inspire some of the earliest laws aimed at wildlife conservation, including the 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty between the US and Canada, a pact that started the formal international protection of birds. Scientists realized that without protection, species wouldn't just decline, they'd vanish. The auk was proof. But the auk story also exposed the gaps in those early efforts. Too often, laws were reactive, not proactive. Too slow, and frequently unenforced. Your quirky tidbit: there's a small town in Newfoundland that celebrates Great Auk Day every year, complete with a festival and a life-sized auk mascot named Aukie. The town's motto? Remember the bird that couldn't fly, so we could. It's part tribute, part lesson, a reminder that the auk's legacy isn't just extinction, but awareness. Yet conservation itself has its complications. Historians still argue about whether the auk's story really changed how people value biodiversity or if it simply became a tragic anecdote overshadowed by ongoing environmental destruction. What this really means is that while the auk's death was a wake-up call, it didn't stop the pattern. It just made us more aware of it. You spot a group of seabirds nearby, guillemots, puffins, kittiwakes, all still flying, diving, surviving. They're the auk's distant relatives, carrying on the genetic line that somehow dodged the fate of their grounded cousin. You imagine what conservationists face today, balancing economic pressures, cultural traditions, and scientific knowledge to protect fragile ecosystems. The auk's extinction is a lens. Through it, we see both the possibilities and limits of human responsibility. You sit on a weathered bench, watching a gull settle on a rock below. The bird cocks its head at you, curious but cautious. In the end, the great auk story isn't just a history lesson. It's a challenge. A question hanging in the salty breeze. Can we do better? Can we learn from the silent wings that once filled these skies and the empty nests they left behind? You breathe deep, tasting the ocean air, and feel that question settle inside you. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep the story alive. You stand now at the crossroads where history meets modernity, a place where the great auk's shadow still stretches into the present day. It's not just a story locked in dusty books or glass cases. It's one that shapes how we approach nature now. You watch the waves, thinking about how this bird's disappearance shifted science. Suddenly, protecting species became urgent, a race against time rather than a leisurely academic exercise. Here's your mainstream fact. The great auk's extinction helped inspire some of the earliest laws aimed at wildlife conservation, including the 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty between the US and Canada, a pact that started the formal international protection of birds. Scientists realized that without protection, species wouldn't just decline, they'd vanish. The auk was proof. But the auk's story also exposed the gaps in those early efforts. Too often, laws were reactive, not proactive. Too slow, and frequently unenforced. Your quirky tidbit: there's a small town in Newfoundland that celebrates Great Auk Day every year, complete with a festival and a life-sized auk mascot named Aukie. The town's motto? Remember the bird that couldn't fly, so we could. It's part tribute, part lesson, a reminder that the auk's legacy isn't just extinction, but awareness. Yet conservation itself has its complications. Historians still argue about whether the auk's story really changed how people value biodiversity or if it simply became a tragic anecdote overshadowed by ongoing environmental destruction. What this really means is that while the auk's death was a wake-up call, it didn't stop the pattern. It just made us more aware of it. You spot a group of seabirds nearby, guillemots, puffins, kittiwakes, all still flying, diving, surviving. They're the auk's distant relatives, carrying on the genetic line that somehow dodged the fate of their grounded cousin. You imagine what conservationists face today, balancing economic pressures, cultural traditions, and scientific knowledge to protect fragile ecosystems. The auk's extinction is a lens. Through it, we see both the possibilities and limits of human responsibility. You sit on a weathered bench, watching a gull settle on a rock below. The bird cocks its head at you, curious but cautious. In the end, the great auk's story isn't just a history lesson. It's a challenge. A question hanging in the salty breeze. Can we do better? Can we learn from the silent wings that once filled these skies and the empty nests they left behind? You breathe deep, tasting the ocean air, and feel that question settle inside you. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep the story alive. You're drifting back now to the personal side of extinction, the stories of individuals who got caught in the great auk's fading world. Not hunters, not collectors, but people who tried to save, study, or at least understand these birds before it was too late. It's tempting to think extinction was all cold numbers and dead bodies, but the truth is threaded with moments of hope, failure, and sometimes stubborn obsession. Take, for instance, the naturalists of the 19th century. Men and women armed with notebooks and curiosity, racing against time to document the auk before it vanished completely. Some traveled thousands of miles to see it, sketch it, capture its behaviors. Here's your mainstream fact. One of the last great auk sightings was recorded by a Danish naturalist named Knud Rasmussen, who described the bird's strange waddling gait and low grunts. His notes became invaluable for understanding what the species was like alive. But not everyone was scientific or distant. There were those who genuinely mourned the bird's loss, a kind of early environmental grief that felt personal and profound. Your quirky tidbit: a wealthy English collector, Sir Edward Sabine, once hosted a lavish dinner where he served great auk meat to guests, ostensibly as a delicacy but also as a kind of tribute to the bird's demise. The guests reportedly found it both delicious and deeply unsettling. Historians still argue about how much these early naturalists' efforts slowed the auk's extinction or if they were merely documenting a doomed species. What this really means is that preservation can be as much about memory as about biology. You wander through archives in your mind, faded letters between scientists debating the auk's fate, sketches of awkward black and white birds, and frantic calls for protection that came just a little too late. You think about the loneliness of those last birds, the pair on Eldey Island, and about the loneliness of those last people who cared enough to record their existence. It's a shared story of loss, stubbornness, and the desire to hold on to something slipping through fingers like sand. You pause on a mental photograph, the great auk, not as a specimen or commodity, but as a living creature with quirks and habits, fear and persistence. And in that moment, the extinction feels less abstract. It feels personal. You take a deep breath, imagining what it might be like to watch a great auk one last time, to say goodbye without knowing it. The sea laps gently nearby, carrying away the past but leaving its weight in your chest. This story isn't just about what was lost. It's about what we carry forward, the regrets, the lessons, and maybe the resolve. You're on the edge of night now, and the story's slowing down, folding in on itself as it nears the end. The Great Auk's tale isn't just about a lost species, it's a mirror held up to us, reflecting our capacity for both care and destruction. You think about how extinction is not a single event but a process. A series of choices, a cascade of consequences, a long, slow drift toward silence. Here's your mainstream fact. The Great Auk's extinction helped shape the modern concept of endangered species. Its story inspired the creation of protective measures and organizations dedicated to preventing other animals from suffering the same fate. But even as we try to save what's left, the auk reminds us how fragile those efforts can be. Your quirky tidbit. In the 20th century, a great auk feather was found embedded in a 15,000-year-old piece of birch bark, showing just how ancient and enduring this bird's place was in human history, even before its final days. Historians still argue whether the auk's extinction was a unique tragedy or part of a broader pattern of human expansion and environmental change. What this really means is that extinction stories are rarely isolated. They're woven into the bigger fabric of our interaction with the natural world. You watch the stars emerge over the sea, feeling the vastness and the quiet. You imagine the auk's last flights, the last dives, the last calls, echoing faintly like a fading song. And then you feel the weight of it all. The loss, yes, but also the chance to learn and to act. You lean into that thought as the night deepens, knowing that stories like this are our way of holding on, even when wings are folded forever. The ocean hums softly beneath you, a lullaby of memory and hope. You're here now, at the final stretch of this long, quiet journey along the shores where the Great Auk once thrived. The sun has dipped low, the horizon blurs between sea and sky, and the memory of the bird rests heavy in the air. By now, you feel the weight of absence, not just of the auk itself, but of all the little ripples its extinction sent through nature and human history. Here's your mainstream fact. The Great Auk's extinction is often called one of the first clear examples of how human greed and carelessness can erase a species. It's a story taught in schools, recounted in museums, and whispered on the wind that brushes barren islands. But it's also a story that's never truly finished, because it's a constant reminder that extinction is a process, not a moment. A slow fading, a series of small acts that add up until there's nothing left. Your quirky tidbit. Some scientists have proposed the idea of de-extinction for the Great Auk, that is, using advanced genetics to bring back the bird from its remains. It's controversial, debated fiercely. Could technology undo centuries of damage? Or would it just create a ghost of what once was? Historians still argue about whether such efforts are hopeful or hubristic. What this really means is that the auk's story keeps evolving, even long after the last bird fell silent. You sit on the cold rock, watching the last light fade. The ocean's steady rhythm calms you, and you feel the threads of the past, present, and future all tangled together. The Great Auk isn't just history. It's a lesson carved into stone and salt air. A caution whispered in the cry of distant seabirds. You close your eyes, letting the quiet settle around you like a soft blanket. The night deepens, cool and gentle, and you drift into a calm place where loss is met with understanding. And maybe, somewhere in that understanding, there's hope. Now, slow your breath, feel the weight of the day melt away. Imagine the cold ocean air turning soft and warm, the harsh cliffs smoothing into gentle hills beneath a velvet sky. There's no hurry here. Just the endless, slow pulse of the waves, the faint whisper of feathers in a breeze you can't quite catch. The Great Auk's story rests beside you, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion. Let the memory fade gently, like twilight slipping into night. Feel the calm settle deep into your bones, the silence wrapping around you like a soft, familiar cloak. You're safe here between what was and what might be. Let the ocean's rhythm lull you, and the stars carry you softly into dreams. Sweet dreams.